We've been going through the book of Zechariah, and of course, Zechariah has had these various visions. They've been prophetic, some closer in than others. Zechariah 8 is interesting because it's going to tie into some things happening today. So let's take a look at it. So the word of the Lord Almighty came to me. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I am very jealous for Zion. I am burning with jealousy for her. Now, this translation is NIV. And it doesn't say Lord Almighty, although it's not a bad translation. You'll find, if you're following along in any other translations, it says Lord of Hosts, Lord of Armies. Hosts are armies, the armies of angels. Okay, and is God Almighty? Absolutely, He is. Don't know why they translated it this way. I guess it's an emphasis on His power, um, that ultimately he is the ultimate power. You know, we see the wars going on in the Middle East, and I will tell you, I read the end of the book, God wins. However, in the meantime, um, there's a lot of challenging things happening. Um, but what you read here in the very beginning is that God's involved in what's going on in the world, and He is jealous for Zion. Okay, Mount Zion, of course, is the key mountain in Israel, in Jerusalem, and the temple is built or was built on Mount Zion. I'm very jealous for Zion. I am burning with jealousy for her. And just referring to it as Zion is I guess in seventh grade English, they would call it synecdoche, where you use a part to refer to the whole. So he's really talking about Israel. Similar type of thing would be to say the White House when you're talking about the administration. That's synecdoche. Um, and he just says, I am burning with jealousy for her. And the word in Hebrew is kind of interesting because if you were to translate it very literally, it would be I'm red-faced. I'm so overwrought with emotion. My face is red, is what that word would typically mean for a human. Um, so it just indicates God is really involved in this. It's not a casual, he's observing, he peeks down from heaven to see what's going on. No, he, this is really the center of what is happening. And here we are, 2,000 years after, almost 2,000 years after Israel was taken into captivity, in theory, never to be seen again, the nation completely destroyed by the mightiest nation of its time, the Romans, who were pretty good at destroying nations. They destroyed quite a few of them that did not come back. Um, but of course, the Jews are not only back, they are one of the mightiest militaries in the world. They are leaders in so many areas. Artificial intelligence, a lot of the discussion is between the United States and China, but a tremendous amount of the development has come out of Israel. And you can look at so many other things as well, military and the rest, and the brilliance. I mean, you may remember how they attacked Hezbollah with the pagers. That was a multi-year effort to gain control of a company that provided all the pagers and then getting all the pagers in the hands of all of their enemies. And in one night, I mean, it's very, biblical. In one night, and actually an instant in time, the majority of Hezbollah was destroyed. Um, well, we continue on in verse 4. This is what the Lord of hosts says. Once again, men and women of ripe old age will sit in the streets of Jerusalem, each of them with canes in hand because of their age. The city streets will be filled with boys and girls playing there. Okay, so we need to understand the context. This is in the late 500s. It's the temple has not yet been rebuilt. They have begun rebuilding the temple. They're about halfway through. The remnant has come back, or at least part of the remnant has come back from Babylon. from the Babylonian captivity. They're coming to a land that is very different from the land that they left 70 years before. It's desolate when they come back. It's not a place where you would bring children. It's not a place where you would bring the elderly. It's a place where you need those who are strong of heart, strong of mind, strong of body to go because it's going to be tough. This is basically the frontier now. And there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of hard work. And if you go back to chapter 7, you'll see that the people had started to see that the temple was now partially finished. And they had asked a question. Okay. And they sent um, two men, Sharezer and Regem um, together with their men, to come and ask the Lord by asking the priests of the house of the Lord Almighty, the Lord of hosts, and the prophets, should I mourn and fast in the fifth month, as I have done for so many years? Well, they had actually four fasts. I think it was the fourth, fifth, seventh, and tenth, or seventh and ninth months. Um, and these fasts were all fasts that were not commanded by the Lord. The only fast the Lord had commanded was Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. That was it. Um, he had commanded seven feasts, seven festivals, but not seven fasts, not four fasts, not even two fasts, just the one, and that was it. But they were fasting to commemorate the collapse of various things related to the attack by the Babylonians and the captivity. And so it was mourning in a very real sense, but mourning what they had lost. They weren't coming before God because God had said, fast, pray, confess your sin, and return to me. That wasn't it. Okay, this was just a man-made fast. So this was ritual to help them remember how great they once had been and what they had lost. And so they came because the temple's half finished, and the one of the fast days was specifically to mourn the loss of the temple. Well, now the temple's half finished. It looks like it's going to get done. And so they're thinking, well, maybe we don't have to fast anymore. Let's go and find out. And God's response to them is when you fasted and you mourned in the fifth and seventh months for the past 70 years, was it really for me that you fasted? And when you were eating and drinking, were you not just feasting for yourselves? Are these not the words the Lord proclaimed through the earlier prophets when Jerusalem and its surrounding towns were at rest and prosperous, and the Negev and the western foothills were settled? In other words, when things were going great, um, didn't the prophet say, when you fast, you're fasting for me? When you feast, are you feasting for me? Because they weren't. They weren't thinking of him. It was the ritual. It was doing these things over and over again, a form of works. Maybe they thought they were pleasing God, but they felt that they were constrained by God and had to do these things. You know, that's not uncommon. Um, it's fairly typical for people to think, well, I have to do this. I can't do that. Um, because God doesn't want me to do that, and He wants me to do this, and so on. And it's going to be different as you travel around and talk with different believers, particularly as you look at different parts of the world, as far as what the rules are. Well, here's the great thing, okay? There aren't any rules. Jesus is the culmination of the law. We'll see that. That the end point of the law, that once you get to Jesus, the law is fulfilled. There is no more any law. So the word of the Lord came again to Zechariah, and this is what he says. And again, they're saying Lord Almighty, and I have to figure out why they're saying that. It's not bad. It's certainly correct. He is the Lord Almighty, but it's just that the text reads the Lord of hosts, the Lord of armies. Administer true justice, show mercy and compassion to one another. So, okay, so if you want rules, there are the rules. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the foreigner or the poor. Do not plot evil against each other. And he continues on, he says, look, they refuse to pay attention. They turn their backs, covered their ears. And the covering the ears is more than just turning their backs. It's saying, I'm not going to hear this no matter what it is. I don't care what the truth is. That's what they're saying, covering their ears. They made their hearts as hard as flint and would not listen to the law, excuse me, or to the words that the Lord Almighty had sent by his Spirit through the earlier prophets. So the Lord Almighty was very angry. And so now he says, when I called, they didn't listen. So when they called, I wouldn't listen. Okay, that's kind of interesting. That getting to a point where God says, sorry, I gave you the opportunity. So God is very patient, but it appears that there is a limit to his patience. And you see that in multiple places in the scriptures. And then he says, I scattered them with a whirlwind among all the nations where they were strangers. Okay, so now it's kind of interesting because this section of scripture and chapter 8, 7 and 8 are talking about a scattering that goes beyond the Babylonian captivity. So up through this point, there was only one captivity they knew about. There was only one dispersion they knew about, and it was to Babylon. And now, because of Cyrus, when he took power, they're coming back. Okay, and ultimately, Cyrus really is the one who sees that the temple gets rebuilt. Recall how Nehemiah came to him. But when the Medes and Persians took over, they sent them back. Um, and it says the land they left behind was so desolate that no one traveled through it. Well, that happened twice. That happened both after the Babylonian captivity, but then it also happened after the Roman captivity. And for years, basically for millennia, it was desolate. Mark Twain visited in the 1800s, and he commented on just how desolate it was. Craig Loudermilk got there about the same time, maybe a little bit later, saw it. He was a believer. His parents were missionaries in China. He himself was, I guess you might almost call him a climatologist, although he certainly did not believe in global warming. But he studied climates and what caused climates, microclimates and macroclimates. And he got to Israel, and he was shocked that it was not a land flowing with milk and honey, that it wasn't lush as it was described in the scriptures. And he is the one who guided the Zionists to plant trees because the desolation had really come big time when the Nabatean Arabs, I think around about the 6th century, went through and they were nomads. They had no use for the trees other than as firewood. So they cut them all down. Well, cutting them all down completely changed the climate. And so Craig Loudermilk worked with the Zionists to plant trees. And over time, you've seen a lot of the lushness of Israel return. Now, I don't think it's back to where it once was, but it's certainly much better than it was in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Okay, so the chapter 7 is basically a warning to them, and it's saying, look, um, you're keeping your own laws for your own reasons, has nothing to do with God. Um, if you want to please God, administer true justice, show mercy, compassion to one another. Don't oppress the widow or the fatherless, the foreigner or the poor. Do not plot evil against each other. Those are really just practical implications of the basics, the Ten Commandments. And of course, Jesus in Matthew 25 says that the sheep and the goats, believers and unbelievers, will be together in the church until he returns. And the way that he will divide them up is those who cared for those in need would be demonstrating their faith. The evidence of their faith is whatsoever you did for these brethren of mine. He doesn't even say the brethren or their brothers. He said the least of these brothers of mine, the ones that can't pay you back. That's agape love. The ones who demonstrated that they didn't just care for people because those people cared for them, but they cared for people who could not return anything in any way. Um, okay, so chapter 7, then, he's basically reprimanding them and he's telling them, focus on what's really important, not the rules and the rituals. Um, then he gets to chapter 8 and he says, look, the Lord of hosts is very zealous for Zion. It says he is burning with jealousy for her. And then the Lord says, I will return to Zion and dwell in Jerusalem. Okay, now the people have come back, so they're now in Babylon, some of them, a remnant. And now God is saying he will dwell in Jerusalem, which they would probably take refers to the temple being completed. But it's more than that. Something big is going to happen in Jerusalem. It says it's going to be called the faithful city or the city of faith. And the mountain of the Lord Almighty will be called the Holy Mountain. Well, if you fast forward to today with the Jews back in Israel, not all Jews, but roughly half of the Jews back in Israel, and the fact that Israel at this point, though a secular nation in many regards, is a place where people go on pilgrimages to visit the Holy Land. Okay, and we call it the Holy Land. Okay, well, at the time that Zechariah was written, it wasn't called the Holy Land. It was just a desolate place. And these people had just come back. So we see elements of this prophecy already being fulfilled. People go there. I mean, it is the center of the three largest religions in the world. It's where people go. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Once again, men and women of ripe old age will sit in the streets of Jerusalem, each of them with cane in hand because of their age. The city streets will be filled with boys and girls playing there. I take this to mean that it's safe. That's a safe place to be. Now, it's interesting. J. Vernon McGee viewed it as since boys and girls will be playing in the streets, that there won't be any cars. But I don't think that's what it means, but it could be. Um, but you have people growing old there now. That wasn't the case for the Jews. Babylon was hard. It wasn't a place where kids were playing. It was a tough life. And the Jews have gone through slavery, in Egypt. They've gone through subjugation in Babylon, and then they've gone through incredible dispersion because of the Romans in 70 AD, and a good deal of slavery. Um, Over 1 million Jews in 70 AD were taken to Rome as slaves. That's a lot of people. Um, and so you see these statements here, and in our time, in our day, I believe this is fulfilled. Maybe not totally. It may just be the initial fulfillment. Some would assign this to the millennial age, but clearly people grow old In fact, they have a pretty good health system. And there are kids who can play in the streets. This is what the Lord Almighty says. It may seem marvelous to the remnant of the people at this time. In other words, he's saying, I know to you who have just gotten back from Babylon, and you see all the desolation here. This seems impossible. This is something you would marvel at. But he said, it's not going to seem marvelous to me. I can do this. With God, all things are possible. And so he continues on and he says, I will save my people from the countries of the east and the west. Now that's kind of interesting. Babylon is to the east. That's it. That was the captivity to the east. The Jews had not been dispersed to the west in the Babylonian captivity. So here, God is speaking through Zechariah about the future and about a second um, expulsion from the land. And that will happen in 70 AD. And he says, I will bring them back to live in Jerusalem. They will be my people, and I will be faithful and righteous to them as their God. Okay, so let's take a look now at Luke 21. Okay, and this is Jesus speaking. And now the Jews have been back in the land for over 500 years. They have built a pretty good society, although they're occupied by the Romans. Um, and it seems like a pretty solid place to live. But the disciples speak to Jesus, and he tells them, because they're asking about the temple. And so he tells them about the temple, that there's a day coming when one stone will not be upon another. And they ask him, well, when is this going to happen? And he goes through and describes what the future is going to include. Wars, rumors of wars, um, all types of things happening. Of course, that was during the Pax Romana, so there weren't any wars. Any skirmishes would be put down pretty quickly. Any revolts would be put down pretty quickly. But then he continues on in verse 20. When you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near. Okay, so it was made desolate once. Now it's going to be made desolate a second time. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out. Let those in the country not enter the city. For this is the time of punishment in fulfillment of all that has been written. Okay, and so how dreadful. And by the way, the Jews inadvertently agreed to this when they stood there as Pilate said, um, who shall I free? Jesus or Barabbas? They said, give us Barabbas. And what should I do with this Jesus? Crucify him. And they went on to say, let his blood be upon our heads. Well, in 70 AD, this is what happened. His blood was upon their heads. Let those in the city get out. Let those in the country not enter the city. That happened. The Christians, many of whom had stayed in the city, wound up leaving, and the gospel spread even further as they left because they knew this prophecy. And here it says, for this is the time of punishment in fulfillment of all that has been written. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. There will be great distress in the land and wrath against the people. So you wind up now, kids not playing in the streets anymore, the elderly not walking around. Um, it even goes so far here to say that they, the Jews, will fall by the sword. In other words, they'll be killed and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. Um, Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Okay, and so this then includes within it the prophecy that there is a time when Jerusalem will once again be controlled by the Jews. And of course, that happened I would suggest to you in two parts. In 1967, when they got the physical control of the land, and May 18th, 2018, when the embassies of many countries, starting with the US, were moved to Jerusalem to recognize it as the capital of Israel. But there is more. Okay, so if you look at Romans chapter 11 to verse 25, Paul writes, and in chapters 9, 10, and 11, he's talking about the Jews. Are the Jews lost forever? And he says, no. He says, I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery. And of course, mystery you can view as secret because in amongst the Greeks at that time in their language, uh, the word for mystery meant something that was not known before, but is being revealed now. So a secret now revealed, something hidden now revealed. So he says, brothers and sisters, I don't want you to be ignorant, so that you may not be conceited. In other words, thinking, hey, God saved us, the Gentiles, and the Jews, they're nothing anymore. He says Israel has experienced a hardening in part. So there's always a remnant. And there was in the desert, there was throughout the time of their living in the land during the first time they were there. Um, you remember how Elijah was told that there were 7,000 who had not bowed the knee to Baal. There was a remnant, even though he thought he was all alone. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the full number of the Gentiles has come in. Okay, so this is an echo back to Luke 21 in what we just read. Now, here it says the full number of the Gentiles has come in. Some translations say the times of the Gentiles have been fulfilled. It says, and in this way, all Israel will be saved. So, what we see is back in Zechariah, back in Luke, there is a dispersion throughout the world. The Jews then come back, and that at some point after that, God's plan moves from the Gentiles to the Jews. So some would describe it as there is this parenthesis that God is working with the Jews, and he gets to the 69th week. The Messiah is put to death, and Jesus then raises from the dead. And then there is this seventh week. And there's a parenthesis in time where God says, okay, done with the Jews for the time being. Now I'm going to focus on reaching the Gentiles. And Paul writes here in Romans that he grafts in the branch that is the Gentiles, a wild branch, into the cultured branch of the Jews, the tended, carefully tended branch of the Jews. And that the two then become one, all children of Abraham by faith. And so he continues on. He says, as it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will turn godlessness away from Jacob. And this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. Turning godlessness away from Jacob means they're turning to Christ. And so now he says, as far as the gospel is concerned, the good news, they're enemies for your sake. In other words, they're enemies of the gospel for your sake. At this point, Gentiles being saved. That's what he's writing. So right now, the Gentiles are being saved. But he says, as far as election is concerned, they're not lost forever. So they are loved on account of the patriarchs. For God's gifts and his call are irrevocable. He made commitments to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he will fulfill those commitments. And so he said to Abraham, I'll bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you, and through you, all the nations of the world will be blessed. And that's what we've seen happen. Even when the Jews did not exist as a nation. Hitler, having come against the Jews, was ultimately under that curse. He was destroyed. God protected the Jews. Now, a lot of Jews were lost. But ultimately, because of what happened in Nazi Germany, there was support on the part of many in the world to get the Jews back to their ancient homeland. Would not have happened any other way. And because of what happened in World War One, the British were able to retrieve the land to the east of the Mediterranean, the area, including the area called Israel, um, as spoils of war, because the Ottoman Empire had controlled it previously and they lost it in that war. So we see that the 20th century was a really key century for the Jews. And you saw the wars in the 20th century and now where absolute miracles happened with kids fighting off armies, with one or two tanks fighting off a huge tank command. So let me go back now to Zechariah. But what we see is that these little threads that all tie together relate to us today. Okay, so we get to this section again. So the countries of the East and the West. Well, that's what happened in 1948. Okay, the dispersion to the West happened in 70 AD. Dispersion to the East happened years before with Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon conquering them. And God says, I will bring them back to live in Jerusalem. They will be my people. I will be faithful and righteous to them as their God. If we go to Isaiah chapter 11, what we see is that Isaiah likewise prophesies in that day, the root of Jesse will stand as a banner. Okay, now the root of Jesse is um, the scion of David. Okay, Jesse was David's father. And the word root, uh, the same on here in the Old Testament, also the netzer means branch from the stump of Jesse. The rabbis knew that this was describing the Messiah. And the phrase in one way or another appears multiple times in the Old Testament. The Messiah will stand as a banner for the people. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. Now, if you go a little bit farther down, it also mentions a banner, and it says, he will raise a banner for the nations. Okay, United Nations, a banner for the nations, a flag for the nations. What was a flag for the nations that flew out over their head? It says, and gather the exiles of Israel from the east and the west. I mean, this was fulfilled in 1948. It's amazing how precisely that he then assembled the scattered people of Judah from the four quarters of the earth, basically bringing them back to the land. Until the Holocaust, most Jews did not want to leave their comfortable homes to go and settle in the relatively desolate land of Israel at that time. But they created a nation, and in a relatively short period of time, they were fending off some of the largest armies in the world. When David Ben-Gurion established or led the establishment of the nation in 1948, they immediately were doing battle with seven Arab nations that surrounded them, who were seeking to drive them into the sea and thought they could do it in 1 week. It didn't happen. And the multiple wars that they've had, they have been attacked time and again. Now, today, you see some who are condemning Israel, saying they've committed great genocide um, in Gaza. Well, it's a very strange thing because the Israelis are somewhat unique in that they notify everyone where they're going to bomb in advance so that people can leave. Now, there have been certainly civilian casualties, but that's part of the plan of Hamas. It's what the Iranians do. It's what Hezbollah does. In Gaza, though, it's almost a fine art that they build their headquarters, they build their meeting places, they build their armories under civilian buildings. Quite often it's hospitals, so that if they're attacked, their goal is that there would be civilian casualties. Um, I would suggest to you that the um, the command of God to pray for the peace of Israel still stands. That the blessing and curse that God gave to Abraham still stands. I'll bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. And that at this time, when we have a media that doesn't necessarily present things honestly or accurately, my suggestion would be trust the scriptures, stick with Israel, pray for them, and support them. Does that mean they're Christians? No, some are, and there are many more coming to Christ. And I've shared before how there are large groups here in the United States and in Israel who now are Messianic Jews. Some of you follow Jonathan Cahn. Well, he's a wonderful Messianic Jew who I believe is a prophet for our time. Um, but you see these prophecies in the scripture, they're coming to pass. We live in the age in which these things have happened already and are continuing to play themselves out. Now, let me go back to Zechariah. So he says, now hear these words, let your hands be strong so that the temple may be built. So they're halfway through. We say, keep doing it. But now he's not saying, um, I'm upset with you, but rather he's saying, let me tell you about the blessings that are going to be coming. He says, this is also what the prophets said who were present when the foundation was laid for the house of the Lord Almighty. Before that time, there were no wages for people or hire for animals. No one could go about their business safely because of their enemies, since I had turned everyone against their neighbor. But now I will not deal with the remnant of the people as I did in the past, declares the Lord. He said, the seed will grow well, the vine will yield its fruit, the ground will produce its crops, and the heavens will drop their dew. I will give all these things as an inheritance to the remnant of this people, just as you, Judah and Israel, have been a curse among the nations. So I will save you, and you will be a blessing. Do not be afraid, but let your hands be strong. So he's now saying, you're going to be a blessing. Okay, now, part of this is a blessing to the nations, as he prophesied and when he blessed Abraham. Through you, all the nations of the world will be blessed. And we have certainly seen that. Um, the discoveries made by the Jews are phenomenal. Some of you know that I have this diapulse machine, which is an incredible miracle, designed by Jews, you know, um, Abraham Ginsburg, Arthur Milanowski, Albert Einstein, um, designed by Jews. You see all the medical breakthroughs from Jews, Salk, Sabin, Heimlich maneuvers, one that you wouldn't normally even think of. You know, 40, 50% of all of the prizes in physics and math and so on, the hard sciences have gone to Jews, even though they're a small fraction of 1% of the world's population. Over 200 of the Nobel Prizes out of the 900 plus given um, have gone to Jews. So we see that these things actually are happening. Tucked away here in this book of Zechariah are a lot of wonderful prophecies. This one is a little bit longer in the way that it states it, but it's pretty powerful that the Jews would one day be blessed. Can you put yourself in the mindset of a Jew who's just come back from Babylonia? Okay, so um, you probably were born there. That's all you know. You're not even a people with a nation. Now, all of a sudden, you go back to this nation you heard about and how wonderful it was, and it's a mess. It's desolate. You heard about how great the temple was that Solomon built, and there's not much there. And even what they're building now is really not much of a temple, but they're halfway through anyway. Um, and then God says, look, keep working on this. It is my plan to bless you very richly. This is going to be an incredible place. Kids will play in the streets. The elderly will live here without any problem. The seed is going to grow well. The vine is going to yield its fruit. The ground will produce its crops, and the heavens will drop their dew. Um, and he said, I'm going to give all these things as an inheritance to the remnant of this people. In other words, the Lord's saying, I'm really going to bless you. So it kind of had the stick first and now the carrot. The stick in chapter 7, the carrot here in 8. And he says, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Just as I had determined to bring disaster on you and showed no pity when your ancestors angered me, so now I have determined to do good again to Jerusalem and Judah. Do not be afraid. These are the things you are to do. Okay, so now he tells them. Oh, and it's not keep the fast days. Remember, that was the question. Should we keep the fast days? Should we keep doing it? He says, forget about all that. None of that matters. Speak the truth to each other. Render true and sound judgments in your courts. Do not plot evil against each other. Do not love to swear falsely. All this declares the Lord. Now, when you read these words, you may think about some of the things we've seen happen in our own country in recent years, where there have been people who have sworn falsely, brought others to court, who've done all types of things, and it was made up. When God gave the Ten Commandments, he did not say, thou shalt not lie, although certainly he doesn't want you to lie. He said, thou shalt not bear false witness, because that breaks down a society. The righteous wind up arrested and imprisoned based on false witnesses. Now, in the time of Jesus, as in the time of Moses, the Jews understood that the truth is established on the testimony of two or more witnesses. That's what was in the Mosaic law. But we have moved from that. So today, it's enough to have an allegation. And if it's one person's word against another, well, shop around, find a venue where you've got a court that can be packed with people who are favorable to your position, and you can win in court. Okay, so some of these things it's talking about with regards to the judges come awfully close to home today. And God says, I hate all this. He just wants righteous judgment. Seek out the truth. And he gave a simple principle for it. Two corroborating witnesses. Remember, they could not get two corroborating witnesses with Jesus. They tried, and a lot of people brought forward their stories, but they couldn't find somebody who could corroborate. And it's not a corroborating witness for somebody to say, he did the same thing to me. That's not a corroborating witness. It's a different event. It's two people who see the same event and report on it, and what they report matches what each says. And so then we read Zechariah says, the word of the Lord Almighty came to me. This is what the Lord Almighty says. The fasts of the fourth, fifth, seventh, and 10th month. Okay, those were the ones they were keeping where they were mourning the loss of their old country, of the temple, just mourning several different things. He says, forget about them because they're going to become joyful and glad occasions, happy festivals for Judah, therefore love, truth, and peace. Okay, and he's saying, stop agonizing about the past. You can't go back and change it. That's what it was. But God can bless you in the future. Um, don't live looking in the rearview mirror. The road ahead is exciting. And it doesn't matter what point in life you're at. The road ahead is exciting. We wind up on this road that we're on right now. And yeah, there are problems and trials and challenges. But boy, what a great destination we have. And there's still great blessings, even in the latter years of your life. There were great blessings when you were kids. There are great blessings as young adults. You think about all the wonderful things that have happened. Paul says, whatsoever is right, whatsoever is good, whatsoever is noble, think on these things. And it's really the idea that focus your mind on the good things. You can look at our society today, you can look at what's happening in the world, and you can really, really get upset. There are good reasons to get upset. However, that's not where our head should be. We need to be aware of what's going on, and to the degree that we can take any action, certainly with our vote, um, contacting congressmen and others, we should do what we can do. Um, but the joy of the Lord will be your strength. They'll know you're Christians by your love. The mark of the Christian is love. And so when you see the challenges and the problems and such, for some, those are the things that you're called to work on, that we're called to work on. But in the midst of all of it, we should be rejoicing. In fact, here, he's basically saying, you know, um, turn the times of sorrow into times of joy. Celebrate, enjoy. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Many peoples and the inhabitants of many cities will yet come. Well, that's actually been happening in Israel. They come to Jerusalem, and the inhabitants of one city will go to another and say, let us go at once to entreat the Lord and seek the Lord Almighty. I myself am going, and many peoples and powerful nations will come to Jerusalem to seek the Lord Almighty and to entreat him. Well, that happens now. Okay, but for the people in Zechariah's time, this was unimaginable, you know, too marvelous for them to even think it could happen. That's what God says, but not too marvelous for God to plan out and do. And so he says, this is what the Lord Almighty says. In those days, 10 people from all languages and nations will take firm hold of one Jew by the hem of his robe and say, let us go with you, because we have heard that God is with you. Okay, now I believe that this is yet to come. And I believe this is what Paul is talking about when the Jews turn to Jesus. And we're already seeing some, and it's becoming more and more pronounced, and more are turning to Christ. And Lord willing, in our lifetime, we will see this happen fully and totally and completely.